Greetings and thanks for sharing a little bit of time with us. I'm with Steve Altick. My name is Ron Barron. I have a couple of websites. One is called SaveMyBest.com, and the other one is BloominBoomer.com. And this is numero uno in our podcast. And Steve Altick has graciously accepted an invitation to spend a few minutes with us, maybe 40 or so. I've known Steve for a couple of years now, and we have had a chance to play some golf, have some dinners together, and I know his lovely wife, Kathy, and I've even met, I think, most of his children and a bunch of his grandchildren. So good morning, Steve. You are in sunny Washington. I'm in sunny Arizona, and through the magic of Zoom, we're able to get together and have a chat. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Good to see you, Ron. And yes, it is a nice sunny day in Yakima.
Awesome. So Steve, we could probably spend an hour or more talking about the age we live in, and that's COVID-19, but that's not our purpose. But on the other hand, since we are in the age of COVID, and that is in the year 2020, do you have any thoughts? Have you done anything to survive it? What's your thinking about this pandemic this day?
Mm-hmm. Well, as you know, Ron, one of my youngest daughter is a doctor, so we get a lot of information back and forth. I think I'm in the camp that says maybe we're in an overreach area. I'm sure you saw in the last few days that these new statistics where there's so many people out there that have had slight cases, and that have immunity, and that if you put those numbers in, lowers the death rate to below 1%. Which makes you think, okay, if it's below 1%, we ought to just go back to work. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. We've been good here. The community we live in is great, no cases, and we've been trying to comply, get out every day, do something. But I feel like at least in the state of Washington, there's a bit of a overreach. It's good to see the news today that so many states are opening up.
Right. Do you remember how old you were in 1969?
1969, I was 29.
29. Do you remember Woodstock?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember that in 1969, actually it was in December of 68, a virus came over from Hong Kong, and it killed in 1969 over 100,000 Americans and some number of a million or so plus worldwide. And I don't know if you were 29 years old, do you remember any specifics regarding that particular pandemic?
Well, I remember that culture, that Woodstock culture in 69. I was in the Air Force at the time, overseas at the time. So I do remember it, and I do remember the virus. Didn't pay that much attention to it. Most recently, going on and getting statistics of what it did and what the flu does every year, it's pretty graphic that there's there's thousands and thousands of lives lost from the ordinary flu, and like you said, over 100,000 from that one. So it really puts things in perspective. What we're going through now.
Yeah. When you were 29, you said you were in the Air Force, so I assume you didn't have braids in your hair. And you possibly didn't attend Woodstock. Would that be safe to say?
I did not get to attend Woodstock, but I do recall, I do recall those years. Those were anti-war years, and of course that culture was very very visible, I guess you'd say, in the protests and all of that. So I was very familiar with it.
Yeah. Well, I know you served in Vietnam, and I want to get to that, but let's go a little further back in your life. If you were 29 in 1969, you were born in what year?
1940.
1940. And where at?
Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania.
And what do you remember of your early years?
Well, I don't remember too much about Pennsylvania. My dad moved shortly after that to Southern California. And we lived in Southern California all the way up to when I was in, I think, the 4th grade. So I do remember that. My dad was in the Marine Corps at the tail end of World War II. And so he was stationed at El Toro. So I remember living in Laguna Beach, California. And I remember having to go to El Toro to get shots from the Marine Corps, which I didn't like much. And that's kind of where we live. Both my brothers went to high school there. Both of them did a lot of diving. I can remember a lot of abalone lobsters that they'd bring home. So those were good years. And then we moved up north to the Glendale area, and from there to Oregon. And then most of my formative years were spent in Lake Oswego, Oregon.
And hence the orange-colored hoodie that you're wearing.
You know, that's true. Did go to school at Oregon State, and remain a very loyal Beaver fan to this day, as you know.
I can attest to that. You even cover your golf clubs up with orange of some sort. So you spent much of your formative years in Southern California, and at some point in time, you made it through all of your schooling, and you decided to do what?
Well, both my brothers attended Stanford from California, and when we moved to Oregon, then I was searching for I pretty much wanted to fly from about age 12 on, and so I searching for a college, that the Air Force had a program at. I was playing football at the time and was trying to combine both, but my football career was just 1 year, and the Air Force was at Oregon State, so that's why I selected that school.
What school?
Oregon State.
Oregon State, and so what was that before you had joined the Air Force or after?
Well, that was before. That was right out of high school, but my selection was kind of based on the Air Force availability of the Air Force program.
Okay. And once you, then I assume you graduated from college, university, and then you went into the Air Force. Is that
Yeah, went into the Air Force, graduated in 62, went into the Air Force in September of that year, and pilot training lasts about a year, and fighter training lasts 7 months. And then we went to our first operational base, which was in New Mexico, and we were there 3 weeks, and I was in Vietnam after that.
How long were you in Vietnam?
Three different tours. So my last one was a year. My first two were chunks of 5 months and 6 months. And
so you spent a total of a couple of years in Vietnam.
Yeah, I was throughout those years. 64, I was there the first time, and 64, 65, back in 68, back finally in 73.
And in Vietnam, you did what?
Flew F-100 aircraft, fighter aircraft for the Air Force, and the first base was Da Nang. That was right after the Gulf of Tonkin, and we were the first squadron in, and we flew a lot of escorts and not much combat till March of 65 when the first missions began.
F-100s, any other type of aircraft?
Flew the last time over there. I was flying F-111s, and then I flew F-4s last, but I wasn't not in Vietnam. That was after the war was over. That was my last assignment.
I assume you saw some combat.
I did.
Can you characterize that at all?
Well, there were a lot of different missions. The first time we were there, we were escorting electronic surveillance up the coast of Vietnam, almost all the way up to Hainan Island, which was Chinese, and we were basically escorting in an air-to-air role, protecting the airplane. We never saw any combat in that. We saw some Chinese MiGs, but we never got close to them. That was followed by some escorting and reconnaissance into Laos, and we could fire back if we were fired on. So that was the first combat that I had where we actually expended ordnance. That was followed then by a lot of, after the first raid in North Vietnam, March of 65, which we flew on. And then after that, it was a lot of close air support in South Vietnam and Laos, supporting, Army units.
Right. You exited Vietnam in what year?
The last tour was in 1973.
And that was Nixon still president, or was he on his way out by then?
He was on his way out after that. Actually, it was '74, I think he resigned, and I was still in Thailand, and I remember listening to his speech that he resigned, and then shortly after that, Vietnam, North Vietnamese invaded, and the whole thing kind of went south very quickly. And I was still in Thailand. We flew the last missions. You may remember the Maya gas when that freighter was taken, and that was my last mission. We did fly on that mission, and then shortly after that, I came home. And of course, President Ford was in office at that point, and the Maya gas happened.
And then you were back into the States, and you stayed with the Air Force for some time. Is that right?
I did. I came back and was very fortunate to get a flying job with the Arkansas Air National Guard. So I was the regular Air Force representative with the National Guard in Fort Smith, Arkansas, which was where our youngest was born, and Bill Clinton was the governor.
Interesting. So you've seen some interesting political characters throughout your life, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. So you spent some time in Arkansas. Any other places of note in your Air Force career that you spent time at?
Well, I spent time in the Southwest a lot. Cannon, probably for the longest time. We had 2 tours in New Mexico. I was Clovis, New Mexico, right on the border with Texas. Fort Smith, we were there quite a while, and then I had a year of graduate school in the Air Force in Maxwell Air Force Base, which is in Montgomery, Alabama. And then we had a 2 or 3 year tour in the Philippines. That's earlier. That was in the '65 through '68 timeframe that we were stationed in Clark Air Base in the Philippines, and our oldest daughter was born there.
In the Philippines?
Yes.
Okay. And in the Philippines, what did you do for the Air Force?
I was still flying F-100s, and we were flying in and out. We were flying in Vietnam, go over there for 3 and 4 weeks at a time. And then we were setting nuclear alert on an island called on Taiwan, southern tip of Taiwan. In those days, Cold War days, the F-100s had a nuclear mission as well.
So Steve, you spent 23 years in the military, I understand. Give us some reflections on that experience and in terms of what you saw then as to maybe what you see today.
Yeah. Well, I grew up, I think, with a lot of knowledge in the military. As I said, my dad was a Marine. Both my brothers were Marines. And World War II and then Korea. And then, as I said, I wanted to fly. So I kind of moved into that vein. And when I got in the military in 1962, it was kind of a different world. Vietnam happened, the draft happened, and then we got into the anti-warriors. So I think what concerned me most was how all of the culture kind of morphed after that anti-warriors into the all-volunteer force, which I think was a attempt to placate the many people, young men that got drafted for Vietnam who didn't want to get drafted, and it was not a high point of our military experience for sure. But at that point, I remain today very skeptic on the all-volunteer force because of the disconnect with our culture and our families. And if you go look at World War II, we had over 13 million soldiers, and you look at the other wars we fought, and most families had a connection. If they didn't have a direct family member, they had a nephew, somebody that was in the military. And Congress was dominantly military veterans. Nowadays, many families have no connection, no knowledge, no connection. And Congress has very few veterans in the Senate or in the House. So I think that hurts in terms of the whole perspective of the military's role and support for it.
So you essentially spent your first career in the military, in the Air Force. You possibly didn't have to, but you chose to. What was it that made you wish to spend 23 years?
It's all about flying, I think, and my mindset so favorable to the military because of my family. I had a military background, so the military appealed to me. The Marine Corps didn't appeal to me as much as the Air Force, just because Marine pilots don't fly all the time. They have to do, they have to intersperse their career with ground duty, and I wanted to fly as much as I could, so that's why I selected the Air Force.
So you epitomized, and I'm trying to imagine you some years younger as a hot fighter jock. Was that a true characterization of you, Steve? Was that how you saw yourself as well?
I think so. I think they instill that in you in fighter training. I remember my first instructor sat four of us down and said, who do you think's the best fighter pilot in the world? And of course we gave him Chuck Yeager or gave him different names, and he says, you guys are all wrong. You're the greatest fighter pilot in the world. We're going to make you the greatest fighter pilot in the world. So I think they kind of instill that in you, and it breeds just kind of and what you really need to fly fighters fast. You have to think quick, and you can't really. It does take a certain mindset, I think. Not everybody likes to do it.
Yeah. But for you, there was a real love of flying, and that's what kept you to some degree within the Air Force and made it a career.
It did, and I tried to select assignments where I could fly. They weren't always career enhancing jobs. I didn't want to go to school, but I did, and so those kinds of things. But I was very fortunate, and most of my career, I was able to fly.
And you exited the Air Force as a what?
As a lieutenant colonel.
Lieutenant colonel, yes. And you can still do a very crisp salute?
I can.
Excellent. So exiting the Air Force, you're still a relatively young man. You had time and energy, and you obviously thought about doing other things. What did you end up doing?
Well, Clovis, New Mexico, where we were stationed, was where we really recommitted our lives to the Lord in terms of our Christian faith. I had a wonderful pastor there who's 93, who's still a good friend. And that whole segment of our life kind of pointed us in a direction where when we exited the Air Force, we're very involved in youth ministry. And that led us into camping ministry, Christian camping ministry, which when we got out of the Air Force, that's what we did for 34 years.
So Christian camp ministry for 34 years at different camps, Steve, or did you find one and put in some time there?
Well, we were in Arkansas when we got introduced to camping, and we were invited to go back there and help develop a camp. But in the meantime, and we were living in Tacoma, Washington. In the meantime, we visited a camp, Baraka, near Black Diamond, Washington, and we took a couples retreat out there. And at that point, there was a church-owned camp. They were looking for someone to develop it, and make a long story short, we ended up there for 34 years.
How many years? 34?
34.
34 at Barak camp.
Yep.
Interesting. And what did you do for the camp?
Well, came in, as I said, it was quite small, summer only basically, didn't have a lot of facilities. So they kind of hired me as a development person, and there was just 3 staff. And we were able to grow it. And it grew into one of the larger conference centers in the state, one of the larger Christian conference centers in the state. So I was basically the CEO of that ministry for those years.
And did you were your children all mostly raised by then, or were they raised in the campground setting?
Our youngest, who was born in Arkansas, of course, was just 3 years old when we went to camp. Our son was a 7th grader. Our daughter had just enrolled at Seattle Pacific University in college. So they were all at camp. They worked in the summer. Emily, our youngest, kind of grew up as a camp kid.
And Emily is your medical doctor daughter?
Yeah, she's an emergency pediatrician at Children's Hospital in Seattle.
And your oldest daughter, her name is?
Jennifer.
Jennifer, and what does she do?
She is a teacher. She teaches gifted 4th and 5th graders in the Puyallup School District.
And then I think you had one son?
One son who's a business person. He has 4 restaurants in the Auburn, Kent area, barbecue restaurants, and a couple of pub type places.
And he's able to survive this in the age of COVID.
He is challenged, but very proud of him. He converted to takeout early, very early, and has been able to, and he qualifies for several of the small business administration loans. And so he's doing well. And with the governor opening up golf courses, one of his restaurants at the golf course, that will involve a lot of takeout and more business. So it's not where it used to be, but I think he's surviving.
How many grandchildren do you have, Steve?
We have 7, 6 boys and 1 girl. And I might add, my girl is a freshman at Oregon State University.
That's got to make Grandpa proud, huh? You have 6 grandsons, I think you told me, and your oldest grandson is doing what?
He's a junior in high school, doing very well, and he's been kind of a fun thing to work with and talk to about where he's going in life, what he wants to do, and the culture that he's growing up in. So I work hard on trying to give him some history. It's very concerning to talk to students nowadays, high school students nowadays, and realize how little history they really have of our own country, from founding to World War II. So I have spent a lot of time with him on quizzing him, with World War II questions, and sent him some World War II battle information. And so he's in an AP history class, and he's doing real well in there. And I like to think it's because he's at least got a feel for, that segment of our history that just isn't taught in a lot of schools. But so it is in some. He's got a very good AP instructor that works hard on American history. So the others are a little younger, but we try and talk to them about the military, their responsibilities, things like voting, things like being a good citizen, those kinds of things.
So in the age of COVID, it's probably difficult to throw your arms around them and them yours. How have you stayed in touch with your family, Steve?
Well, we used a lot of FaceTime on WhatsApp, individual families, but we've also done family Zoom conferences. We did an Easter and had all 13 on the Zoom, and then we're going to do one Mother's Day. So, we do try and, stay in touch as much as we can.
So Mother's Day is going to be, and I think you were probably a family that often gathered on Mother's Day. Is that true?
Yeah, we did. Easter as well.
Yeah.
Usually had big dinner someplace, and so those are special days.
And you're going to attempt to do that virtually this year. I would assume you and Kathy are going to stay home. She's going to cook a lovely meal and
get the big Zoom conference, which went very well Easter. I wasn't sure how well it would go, but it went very well.
So we're talking about, you were giving, you have one son who you're helping out in their advanced history. So you have these grandchildren, and I know you're a grandfather that wishes the very best for them. What would be some of Grandpa's very best advice? Steve, do you have anything you might sit down and talk with him sometime about?
Well, I think the way things are nowadays, most discussions, most teachable moments come as a result of something in the news. Either of course, obviously this pandemic, but natural disasters, politics, controversial subjects, all those kinds of things. I think have a chance to express what I call a Christian conservative viewpoint. The ones that are older, there's things that you can use to talk to them and try and instill. My hope is that when I'm gone, they'll remember me as a conservative Christian person, who was patriotic and who served their country, and also was a decent person.
Well, I have an idea that they will. So in terms of your life, I know you well enough to know that it has not always been a smooth sledding. that there have been some challenges along the way. Would you be willing to share with me and anyone listening what one or two of them might have been?
Sure. I think all families, have different degrees of hardship. You lose people in your family. We were blessed that when our parents died, they were all at advanced age, so they had good lives. Probably our biggest challenge was our oldest daughter, who contracted cancer when she was 12 in Fort Smith, Arkansas. What's called a Ewing sarcoma, which in those days was a pretty serious disease. So we went through, and the Air Force is so good to take care of you. They flew her to Wilford Hall, which is the Air Force hospital, did all the biopsy work and so forth, and then recommended the 18 months of chemotherapy and radiation and so forth. So that was a real challenging point, and we certainly give the Lord credit. The Lord brought us through that with wonderful people that came alongside us. So that to me was a testimony of how strong Christian friends can be and how the Lord uses people in your life. She was able to stay in Fort Smith. That was a career change for me. So it basically kept me in what I would call or let's say it got me out of the fast lane career-wise. I had an assignment lined up which could have enhanced my career, but we couldn't go because we had to stay, and that was God's work. So that was kind of, I wouldn't say a low point. I think it was a scary thing for us, but it was also we came through because of the Lord's grace and mercy and people. And she's, of course, as I shared with it, is a school teacher now and has gets checkups once in a while, but is doing great. And that was that beat the odds on that particular disease.
Would you consider yourself retired today?
Well, I retired full-time work in 2000. Initially 2013, then got called back in the ministry I was working for. And so 2016 was probably my last paycheck.
What any advice that you might give someone who is looking at making the same transition?
Well, I think you've got to find out what you want to do and try and really see the doors that the Lord opens for you, and volunteer work, or even using your life's experiences to help other people in advising or consulting role, which was good for me because I had so many years in a nonprofit camping ministry, and so I was able to, and still able. I'm still working with 2 camps in a program to try and help them. So I think people need to look at their life's experience and then see how that can be applied in retirement, whether it's a consultant or whether it's volunteering with a particular organization. Kathy and I both found volunteer opportunities here to where we try to keep our skills and knowledge in. She loves horses, so she was able to find a volunteer spot here in Yakima for keeping plugged into horses, and we both are doing some tutoring with disadvantaged kids, and then with the consulting and trying to play a little golf and go over and see our kids. We keep pretty busy, Ron.
Yeah, I know you do, and it's awesome. In fact, would you say being busy is kind of important?
Oh yeah, I think so. I think the one thing that's shut in is you can just feel a little bit of a hint, of some of the busy things that you used to do, like go out to dinner with people and things like that are not options anymore. So, and of course, even shopping to some degree you got to think about whether you really need to go and whether you want to go and where you want to go. So, it does introduce a little slowdown in daily activity.
Have you done anything different? Have you figured a way to take advantage of that, or?
Well, we're trying to keep busy. I'm sure we've done a lot more, driving than the governor would like us to. But we go up to Rimrock Lake. We're just for the day, and then find a place to eat lunch. Not go in, find a place for takeout. And so we've tried to take a few little trips like that. A lot more yard work. Usually every day, walk a couple miles, and by then, the day goes fast.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your physical regiment. What do you do to stay young?
Well, as you know, I had some back issues back a year and a half ago, so I'm still doing some therapy for that. Want to make sure I can still play golf. So right now I'm doing physical therapy for 6 weeks, and then just daily prescribed exercises, stretch and also trying to build up back and legs so I can hit the golf ball further than you, which I don't think I'll ever be able to do. But so that's the only physical. I'm not operating with any pain or discomfort. It's just I just trying to get
Steve,
stronger.
one of the wonderful things about the human existence is the ability to remember the most pleasant things and forget some of the less pleasant things. Tell me about some of the things that you recall in your life with great relish.
Well, I think growing up in Lake Oswego, Oregon, we lived on a lake. I did a lot of water skiing. I never, and then I think that was a high point through high school. I loved my 4 years in college. I played 1 year of football and a couple of years of rugby. That was all positive and a special highlight. I think going in the Air Force I remember, so vividly the graduation and getting commissioned, and moving into the Air Force. Certainly remember our spiritual path in Clovis, New Mexico. We were cultural Christians basically, and we were introduced, to how real our relationship with Christ is in that little church in Clovis, and that totally changed the direction of our lives at that point. Actually prepared us for the sickness of one of our child and helped us develop a career path in Christian ministry. So that became a high point, and entering the Christian ministry also, was a real exciting time, and we had a lot of success there. I think were high points in the development of the camp, the growth, the success of the ministry was graphic and a blessing, and definitely those years were a high point.
So Steve, as we start coming up to a close here, I'm still kind of struck with some of the advice that you're giving your grandchildren, and as they prepare for a life. Do you have anything beyond history that you would like to see them experience, or anything that might suggest this is how we approach problems? Is there anything about COVID that you might say, here's an illustration of what we've done right or what we've done wrong?
Well, I think faith is, developing their faith to go through things like they're going through right now is really important, and you can do that in a lot of different ways. Hopefully they see a testimony just of one's life, not just verbally what you tell them, but your ultimate goal for any grandfather is to see your grandkids have a real vibrant faith, Christian faith, and how that can sustain them through hard times and tough times. So you try and make that point whenever and however you can, usually through their parents, and I would say that can have mixed successes sometimes. Trying to discern, when to speak and when not to speak as a parent or a grandparent is always a key to keep in mind.
So when to say something and when to keep shut. That sometimes is a challenge.
Oh, I think so. I think it really requires discernment, I think, to know what the motivation is. But I think when you're older, it's kind of like, okay, what the heck? I'm going to say this, and they can delete it. And I have sent some emails to all of them. I have a kind of a broadcast thing where I can go to all of them, and I send them a scripture and a thought, and I hear back maybe 2 out of 3 of them, or maybe 1 out of 3 of them, or maybe none of them. So it varies.
Yeah. So, Steve, is it fair to say your family is like so many of ours? We've got a wide variety of political perspectives. Anything that you've learned on how to deal with with that variety?
Well, I think loving your family is obviously the most important thing. Acceptance and love, and we've had to practice that with one of our kids who's probably politically not aligned with my other 2 kids and us, but it hasn't impacted the relationship because knowing when to bring things up and knowing when to shut off discussions that you see head in the wrong direction has been really good. I can give you one quick example. Because of social media and WhatsApp and Facebook, there's getting to be more and more political perspectives expressed. So I have nephews that express something, and one of my kids replies, and then one of my other kids replies to that kid's reply, and it gets to where I'm just watching this, thinking this is not going in a really good direction here. And my son, who can be pretty outspoken, he just totally cut it off. I was just so proud of him. He said to his sister, "Okay, well, I love you, and see you later," kind of thing. And just kind of shut it down and assured her of how he felt about her and shut the conversation off in terms of where it was headed.
So,
I was proud.
Is it fair to say that you agree that you share so many more things than you disagree over?
Yeah, I think the basic relationships are strong and powerful, and they bring families together, keep families together. I think there's always opportunity to create a rift, I think, but and especially nowadays with the media, the internet, and so many mediums which people can express themselves on, and once they hit send or post, they're committed, and their family might look at that and say, "My goodness, where'd they come from with that?" And that's happened to us. And you just have to say, "Okay, I'm not going to respond to that, or if I do, I'm going to respond in love and try and change the outlook."
So, if you look back at the era that you grew up in, your very formative years, how would you describe the benefits of those years?
Was a different world. My 2 older brothers, quite older than me, and we just, there were just never those kinds of discussions. Maybe at the dinner table, but they were not. They didn't make an impression on me that I can remember to this day, because most of us, we were on basically the same page. I think when I had one brother who probably was not politically aligned as he got older, because he was a professor, he was a physics professor, and he was very, he was moving in a academic crowd that I'd say was pretty much opposed to my views, especially in the anti-war years. But it never impacted the relationship. We could stay up till 2 a.m. arguing, and never affected the relationship.
So if you take a look and juxtapose those against our culture today, what about our culture today do you find good?
Well, I think technology is wonderful. I mean, the fact that we're doing this is all powerful, but it's also hard sometimes to use it as the means to communicate, back and forth, compared to sitting down at a table, face to face, especially with family. That's a lot easier to make a point, I think, than trying to do it through social media, responding to comments over and over. So I think it's a blessings and a curse thing. The technology is wonderful. It opens up doors and kids are so good at it. I mean, look at all the kids that are doing their school, totally online. But there's probably a negative side to that. When you hear teachers interviewed, how much they miss the face-to-face time with their kids, just like a family does. If you're right now, where we're pretty well cut off, except for electronic means.
Right. So you have some fear as it relates to the technology and how it's being used, but you also see that there are some benefits.
I wouldn't say out of fear. I just think that there are some things in our culture that are not positive for us. You know, as a culture, as a society, I think the total dependence on social media and that kind of way of communicating takes away from, you know, face to face and building relationships. You know, it's hard to build a close relationship if I only see you on Zoom. You know, and I think that's the key to it.
Right. Well, you have anything else you'd like to suggest or offer, Steve?
No, I thought of one more high point was when I moved to Yakima and met Ron Barron, who ended up constructing and building our house, which we dearly love, and who's become good friends. So those are you know, happens things just out of the blue that work out really well.
Well, and feelings are mutual, Steve, and so much appreciate our relationship with both you and Kathy, and wish it was more face-to-face than Zoom to Zoom, but we will take what we can get and hope that this all passes very quickly. We can get back to normal. I hate to think that the rest of our lives is going to be separated by a virus. And
well, I'm hopeful that will not happen.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll be back on the golf course as soon as you get back in town.
Well, hey, Steve, thank you. And again, I certainly appreciate the time that you spent